So I'm Tom. Just to clear up the topic a little bit, because I realise it isn't the most approachable. Anthropomorphic things are things with human traits. So if you think of a film like Bambi, where some of the animals can talk, those are anthropomorphic. They're kind of human-like, but they're also not. And an algorithm is just a piece of computer code. So when I talk about anthropomorphic algorithms, what I'm meaning is like computer code or an AI that can that is kind of human-like in some way, AI that has human traits. And what I'm hoping that I can show you is that whatever it is that you study and whatever it is that you specialize in, we almost certainly need your input to make this field a useful one and not a dangerous one, which is really which is kind of interesting. Hang on. There we are. Okay, so when we think about AI, I think people often think about Terminator, which is fair because we get quite a bad rep, right? What I'll be talking about is less this sort of like human-like computing and more stuff like eBay, if you bear with me. Specifically these star ratings, right, and things like that. Just to explain a little bit, these star ratings, what they're really representing is like a seller's reputation. When a seller interacts with the customers and things, the customers rate them. Over time, they accumulate a lot of this feedback, and then we all agree that this feedback is pretty well summed up in like a number between 1 and 5, and we turn that into stars. And because we all agree on that, we can say that this is a formalism of reputation. So if I talk about a formalism of a trait, what I'm meaning is just some agreed upon way of representing it to everyone. The eBay formalism for reputation, just these stars that we also use for things like an Amazon purchase, is actually of a lot of academic interest. The stuff that I work on looks a bit like this. But this is scary and unapproachable, so we'll stick with eBay. But that algorithm that I just had up there is a version of the eBay formalism for computers giving each other reputations. So if you have a whole bunch of computers on the network and they're all talking with each other, one computer, your laptop might keep giving my laptop a virus. Well, my laptop might reduce your star rating, right? And so you can see this formalism isn't just useful for humans communicating with other humans about each other's reputation, it's also really useful for computers. So, what I work on, why aren't you changing? What I work on is responsibility. And I think a really interesting way to use a formalism of responsibility is how you apply it to something like a smart city. So a smart city, basically we just put a whole bunch of sensors and computers everywhere, and we try and make the city a better place to live using that. Glasgow is a great example of a smart city. I don't know exactly how far we got with the smart city initiative here, but we were actually trying to make traffic flow better by working out where traffic was getting blocked up and things like that, putting a whole bunch of sensors on all of the different roads and working out how traffic can move better. Bristol's another great example. Bristol has Wi-Fi routers in a lot of its streetlights, and when you walk down the street for like a mile of a street in Bristol, you get free Wi-Fi. So these are examples of smart cities. We just put all of these computers everywhere, and life gets better in some way. And so one of the questions that's really interesting to answer is, we have this responsibility formalism that I'm working on. What happens if we make all of these computers responsible? So responsibility happens in 2 ways. One might be that the city knows what it's responsible for. You might give the city a whole bunch of tasks that it has to manage. It isn't just things like making traffic flow better in Glasgow. It might be things like managing the emergency services, right, to make sure that ambulances can get to patients as quickly as possible, which works well if you're managing traffic flow, right? These two begin to work together. It might also be emptying the bins. The city might be responsible for wasting the least resources when the bins get emptied. And a part of that might be that when a bin is full, it tells some server in the city that it's full, and the bin men go around all the full bins, and they don't waste all of their time emptying bins that are already empty. Right? That's a waste of everyone's time and money. The other thing that they can do, though, the way that humans understand responsibility, and a good example of these formalisms in action, is that when a human thinks about responsibility, we think about responsibility in terms of things we're responsible for, but we also think about responsibility in terms of what other people are responsible for and how we make other people responsible. So if you take the A&E example, you might have You might have the city watch the CCTV cameras. And it might be that it's watching the CCTV cameras so it can identify a crime. It might see someone being stabbed. It says, someone's been stabbed on the CCTV, but I'm a smart city. I have all these sensors and all of these computers, right? Things like CCTV cameras. That's great. I'll just call an ambulance for the person. And then the ambulance arrives as quickly as possible. It's managing all the traffic flow, but it has a problem. Which hospital, which A&E department is most responsible for treating that patient? Is it the one with the best reputation? Well, if it's using a reputation formalism, then maybe. It might be the one that's closest. It might be the one that's least busy. It might be a combination of a lot of these factors. So responsibility, when we think about responsibility, we think about all these factors and we measure them, right? A good formalism takes all these factors and ties them together for the best understanding of responsibility in a computer, in a similar way to the way that people do it. An interesting question arises. So this is very sort of sci-fi, right? Smart cities are cool, but Glasgow is kind of managing traffic flow. No one's like identifying crimes and calling ambulances and doing all of this crazy high-tech stuff. That's decades in the future. But these formalisms exist and AI exists, so we should be able to build some pretty cool stuff. So some examples that I quite like about formalisms in action. You can imagine designing a lamp with pity. I think that's a really fascinating example because I think people would actually use it in the real world. I can imagine people who've been out and they've got in after quite a long night and they wake up pretty hungover, and the alarm goes off and they knock the lamp on and the lamp looks at them and takes pity on them and says, "It's been a rough night. For 5 minutes I'm just going to dim it down." And that's useful, right? That's something I can totally imagine people building and using in the real world. And all we need to do that is to have a little pity formalism, have some way of representing pity for computers that's similar to the way that people do, just like we do with reputation. Another example that I quite like is a phone with regret. If you have a regretful phone, it's also identifying regret in other people, right? Like we identify who's responsible, which A&E department is responsible. So the phone could see that you're out at 3 in the morning, and it could see that you're trying to call your ex. And it could say, "You're going to regret that in the morning." And it might just not make the call. And you might think you're leaving a message, and you might pour your heart out. But the phone doesn't really leave the message, it just pretends to. So I quite like this example, and then I mentioned it to my girlfriend, who, who pointed out that the phone is actually censoring your speech there. And so this is an interesting problem, right? That technology seems really useful at first, or at least it does to me. But the problem is that I'm a computer scientist, and I just kind of like to build cool stuff and play with it. What I'm not necessarily always cognizant of is that these technologies affect people's lives, right? And it isn't just about saving lives. It's also about changing lives for the better and making sure we don't do things like censoring speech accidentally with regretful phones. And this is the takeaway, right? This is what I'm trying to communicate, is that it's this Jurassic Park quote that everyone likes. Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't think about whether or not they should. I think that's really true of anthropomorphic algorithms, because people like me will just build toys, and they'll be great, right? And someone will find a way to market them, and we'll get it out into the public, and it'll seem fine. But if it's doing things like censoring speech, that's actually a really big problem. And I would not have noticed that had I not mentioned it to my girlfriend when I was preparing a talk. So that's problematic. I think we need everyone to begin interacting with this field and showing all the neat stuff that we can build and all the right ways to build it and answering all the really difficult and important questions. Oh, it's gone. Let's click it. There we are. We need people like ethnographers, right, who understand culture and the way that we interact with culture and the way that culture influences our lives. We need the sociologists and the psychologists who actually understand these traits and can build these formalisms for us in a responsible way and not in a way that's slightly askew. We need computer scientists not just to build the code, but also to design the interfaces. If your computer is responsible for something or trusts you, how does your computer show you that it has some degree of trust in you, or that it's lost its faith in you as a user? These are really complicated questions that no one really has an answer to. I think we need people from all sorts of different fields. And actually, the smart city example came from me listening to someone else practicing their talk for this. And I hadn't even realized that urban planning and smart cities were a field in geography. But the whole point is that I don't know what needs to be, I don't know what needs to be built, right? All I know is the technology. All I know is the difficult little algorithm. And what we need is all of you guys in the audience to begin like interacting with this technology and building cool stuff and building it in responsible ways. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. I'd love to answer any questions that you've got.
Hi, thank you very much. My question is about working with other fields. And you mentioned that like computer scientists want to do lots of cool stuff and play with things. And I guess my question is about drones, and that maybe it can be quite scary when computers take over. I wanted to know have you like thought, or what do you think of if governments stop the scope for computer scientists to do what they want? How would you manage that or work with that? Yeah.
So I'm not exactly sure that I understand your question. Sorry. Could you elaborate?
Yeah.
What is it exactly that you want me to?
I guess it's just the relationship you would have with governments that would want to stop scientists to do what they want because of like ethical questions.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's a really complicated question, but it's also a really important one. One thing that I really like to think, I don't know if it would work in practice, but I think it would be an interesting thing to maybe to research and maybe to explore, would be using things like responsibility formalisms that we're building now to calculate the degree of responsibility that people have for their research. I think governmental interference with research is a really complicated thing though. Like for example, you mentioned drones. And to a degree, computer science researchers are responsible for things that happen with drones, and to a degree it's governments. I can imagine governments wanting to censor the research that people do so that they can't do bad things with drones accidentally. I think the key to the discussion is more interdisciplinary work, right? Things like this. If we can all begin a communication about the research that we do and have a better understanding of each other's jargon, it becomes a lot more difficult for government to censor the research that a field is trying to do, because all of the other fields can stand up for it. All the other fields understand what they're trying to do. Does that answer your question? Okay, great.
So my question is, with the rise of Internet of Things and smart cities, like you say, where we lay off responsibility to the actual computations and whatnot, to what extent do you think we should rely on their responsibility? Will they be self-regulated, or will there be at some point a human supervising? Thank you.
So I think the key to that isn't necessarily what you would think. Like it feels like humans should be intervening with these computers more, or auditing what the computers do, and the behavior of them. In computer science, we have this term, supervised learning and unsupervised learning. Where if it's supervised, humans kind of interfere and say, no, this isn't what you should be learning. You want to go and learn this instead. I think maybe a better way to do it, though, maybe a better way to begin thinking about that problem is to think, how do we audit the algorithms? So I think academic research like this, where people are building responsibility formalisms, or trust, or pity, or regret. Regret exists, by the way. So like some of these technologies really do, like they're out there in the world. If more academic work is done on that, and the algorithms are published into the wild, it's a lot more easy to identify what a computer might do wrong. To take Lucy's example earlier about the drone, you might make a drone responsible for civilian lives. But once that drone is up in the air, it's really hard to change its feeling about responsibility. If it's got something wrong at that point, it's kind of out of your hands. If you look at the algorithms earlier and you try and prevent the faults before you put the computers out there in the first place, I think that's a more sensible way to solve the problem. So I think there's what I mean to say is there's a dialogue about it at the moment that centers around supervising the learning. I think what we need to do is supervise the creation of the formalisms and think more about the academic research and people reading these papers and getting more involved, which is you guys, right? Getting involved in reading the papers. So, does that answer your question? Yes.